Oh, Heavenly Father, so for the past 6 weeks, we've been talking about this passage in Galatians chapter 5 that we've called the fruit of the Spirit, but it was also what we had talked about for the past 6 weeks has been the works of the flesh. And this morning we're going to start our study now talking about the fruit of the Spirit. I think before we start, though, and maybe it's a little bit of an overview, to find out, this is found in the book of Galatians, and a letter written to the Galatians by the Apostle Paul. And the question is, why was he writing this? What was the reason? Because where we're at in this book, or where this section of the Spirit and the works of the flesh come in, it comes in towards the latter part of that letter. In verse chapter 5. Now, Paul had established the Galatian church on his first missionary trip, and this letter is coming pretty quickly after that, since he first started, when he first established the congregation, or the group of Christians there. And so they're already having issues, and that was what was sparking Paul to write this letter. Paul is talking primarily to the Galatians and talking about their relationship with one another. They have Greek Gentile Christians. They have these Jewish Christians, and there's been problems with the Jewish Christians saying, "Look, it's okay for you to be a Christian, but you got to be circumcised first." And they were holding them to the law of the Moses still. Now, Paul, this letter is probably one of the angriest, most passionate letter that Paul will write. If we can go here, just if you look in the book of Galatians, you can see there, chapter 1, verse 6, "I'm astonished how quickly you're deserting him who called you by his grace." Chapter 3, verse 1, "O foolish Galatians, who has betwixt you?" And he goes on to say, he honestly talks some very hard, even in chapter 4, there in verse 11, "I'm afraid I have labored over you in vain." This isn't something that Paul is really concerned about what's going on here. Paul's going to have to start all over again, basic with them. He has to actually, in chapter 2, defend himself as an apostle. I'm sure these Judaizers who is following Paul around on his first missionary, have put things in people's heads, and already they're falling apart. And not only that, he has to talk to them that they're no longer bound to the law of Moses. And then as we get into chapter 5, where our study will be in, he has talked about there in 13, what he's saying now again is that you can't take the law of liberty and just do whatever you want. And that's what we kind of were talking about with Carl over the past 6 weeks, some of the things that they were involved in, which we call the works of the flesh. So, question is, Jody kind of I saw a devotion a week ago, or maybe it was Monday or whatever. A lot of this stuff that's written in the Bible was written to people 2,000 years ago. They were going through different things. Today, I don't see anybody in here saying, you've got to follow this part of the law of Moses to be a Christian today. But what are some things that maybe they were going through that we could be going through that will make this letter applicable to us? Okay. There's nothing new under the sun, okay? You're right. I mean, everything that we talked about over the past 6 weeks, we can't think that we're immune to. It can happen to us, and it can be part of stuff that we can get ourselves involved in, we can get ourselves intertwined with. So we do have the same thing, and we struggle with the same things they do. We struggle with walking in the Spirit. We struggle with the desires of the flesh. So as we go on here, it's very important, because as we get in here, we're going to see at the end of the works of the flesh there, it said those that practice these will not what? Inherit the kingdom. And we will see here also in chapter 6, he says, but verse 8, the one who sows to his own flesh will sow and reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. So this is something that we are very important about, that we follow, or we try to pattern our lives after what Paul has outlined here, because it's eternal consequences. He's given us God has given us a choice. We can do this, or we can do this. And in the end, like heard somebody said to me, God will stand up and say, thy will be done, to those people that have decided that they did not want to follow him. So it's interesting that, to me it was interesting that, at least in my version, I'm reading out of the ESV, that the works of the flesh is called the works of the flesh. And then as we get into these attributes that are supposed to help us with the works of the flesh, they're called the fruits of the Spirit. To me, I think the Greek word is kind of interchangeable there, but to me a work was something that it's done with no thought, no planning. Some of these things that we talked about with Carl the past 6 weeks, outburst of anger, drunkenness, people just do without thinking. And while we start talking about the fruits of the Spirit, it's more of a mindset. And so my question, I guess, is what do we know about fruits? Pardon me? They're good for you, okay. There's a payoff, okay. What's that? Okay. Okay. Exactly. If I want fresh oranges, and I want to go to my backyard and get fresh oranges. What do I have to do? Got to plant a seed. Okay, there's a plant a seed. That's the long route. I was thinking about planting a tree. But if you really want to take some time, you're right. To get that tree, there had to have been a seed. And that seed had to become a young tree. And that young tree had to be transplanted into the ground. And what was very important was a lot of things, how that tree was treated, how it was watered, the soil condition. We can obviously think of Matthew 13, when Jesus talks about the parable of the sower. He gave all sorts of different kinds of soil, and some of that soil, it sprung up a little bit, and then it died away. But the good fertile soil allowed that tree, allowed that thing to grow and to be able to produce Lots of things, lots of fruit, whatever. So Drew brought that up, but it takes time, it takes care, it takes patience. It's not something I'm going to walk out. I'm not going to plant that tree today and then walk out tomorrow and start picking oranges. It's going to take time. Yes, sir.
When you plant the tree has to be grafted before you plant.
Okay.
And if it's not grafted, you go get shower.
Okay. You're a better agriculture person than me, so. But yes, there's a lot of time stands that takes place before that. And I think that's the same thing that we're going to have to look at when we start looking at these fruits of the Spirit. I don't think someone's going to walk up today and say, tomorrow, I'm going to be loving, or I'm going to be joyful, or I'm going to be, whatever peace and patience and kindness. But it's something that has to be worked on. It's something that we have to devote our lives to wanting to do this. And so that's where I think when we start looking at these compared to what we've been talking over the past 6 weeks, this is something that's going to be something that we have to grow into. And I'm not saying there's some people that are more patient than other people, and there's some people that are more kind than other people, but for us to grow and to be led by the Spirit, we need to let these things grow in our lives. And that's why I think a lot of things when we can look at these fruits of the Spirit and see how they combat those works of the flesh that we talked about. How can I not be part of dissensions or outbursts of anger? And you can look at these fruits that will counteract those. So, over the next 7 weeks, we're going to embark on the study of the fruit of the Spirit. It's something that we can sit here and talk all we want, and it's always good to talk. But if we don't implement them in our lives, if we don't look at ourselves and not look at that person there, well, I know I'm not that loving, but I'm better than that guy over there. This is something that each one of us has to look at ourselves, and we have to pray, meditate, ask God for help in becoming these ways so we can be led by the Spirit and be pleasing to Him. So it's that person in the mirror when you get up every morning. This is all about that person right there. So hopefully when we look at these and we talk about these and we make good discussions about them, that we think in our lives, how can this grow better in my life? Or how can I make this better in my life? How can I help somebody else with this maybe? Because a lot of times our actions have an impact on people. I've had people come up and say, boy, that would have made me mad. How come you just sit back and not say anything about it? And that leads a great time to tell somebody, this is why. So, something we can think about, meditate, because this, again, will affect our life here on earth, and it's going to affect our eternal existence. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That's right. And the Bible will tell us that. We need to talk the talk and walk the walk. Yes, ma'am. All right. Now, when we come to list in the Bible, there's all the time places you can find list, and the Scripture does not really give us any kind of importance on how these fruits are laid out. If you see, like, for example, 2 Peter 1 and verse 5, what does that say there? Can anyone think of it? It's a list. Come on, you learned it as kids. Add to your faith. Yeah, remember all those things that you add to this, add to this, add to this, add to this. So This list here doesn't say, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. But it's interesting that he does start out with love. Now, we will go to Colossians chapter 3 and verse 12. There, he puts another list to the Colossians, and he tells them, put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, patience, bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other. As the Lord has forgiven you, so you must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. So in here, when he's talking about here, he talks about love being this kind of glue that binds everything together. So today, we're going to start, I know that there's 9 fruits of the Spirit. We only have 7 weeks that we're going to be talking about. So we might have to overlap one of these fruits. And some of these we might have to take a little bit longer on. But we're going to try to hit all of these and see what we can do and make sure we hit. Again, we're not going to hit every single point that can possibly be made. And I think when you come to this first one, we could probably do a whole class or a whole 13 weeks on love. So that's kind of look about the background. Does anyone have any comments or anything they want to say before we start talking about this first fruit? Yes, sir. Right, yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Yes, sir. Exactly. Agree. And we try to let people hear what, if he wasn't hearing what Dane said, or sometimes people online can't hear, he's talking about the fact that the works of the flesh, as Carl we talked about over the past 6 weeks, is kind of a selfish, all about me kind of attitude. And he's going to go here and he's going to talk to them about the fruits that are more centered to you, but it's going to reach out to others. So a good point that you bring up there. And we talk about how that affects us today. Don't we live in a self-centered world today? We're taught that. We're taught, if it makes you feel good, do it. If you, go, look out for number one. All this. And that's totally contrary to what we're going to find about what God's talking about here. Yes, sir. Yep. Yes. And then unfortunately, that's what was happening with these Galatians also. It was more me. And they weren't thinking about God and what Christ has done. So let's talk about love. What was brought up here before was people don't know how to love. There's 4 types of love listed in the Bible. And the love that we're going to be talking about here is that love that we've heard of, agape, which is the Greek word for this love. And this love comes from God. It is the heart of his divine being. It divines God's immeasurable, incomparable love for humankind. I mean, it's perfect, it's unconditional, it's sacrificial, and it's pure. So what Paul is talking about here and what he's encouraging the Galatians to do is to love one another. And as we're going to talk about this morning with what we have our time left, it's not a new concept. This is a concept that's goes all the way back really to Deuteronomy. And it's also carried on into the New Testament scriptures, as we'll talk about also. So,
That's kind of interesting that these authors are,
right.
At the beginning of this chapter, you get all of the section on the laws. Are you of this? Are you circumcision? Are you this? Are you that? And so, they were trying to law each other to death. Paul telling them to love each other.
Right.
And the other thing I think about, too, in the context of Galatians is the audience, right? The audience is thinking about Paul as a Hebrew of Hebrews, right? And when they are trying to law somebody and beat them over the head with the law, they probably think they're doing the right thing, right? Their assumption is probably he's doing the right thing. And in trying to please Paul, they not only didn't please Paul, but they did please God. So kind of interesting his conditions, and they were trying to please the person, rather than trying to please God.
Good point. Excellent point. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Exactly. Yep. Yep. Even before he even started the talking about the works of the flesh, he says, you were called, this is chapter 5, verse 13, you were called to freedom, brothers, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. So, yes, love is, it's the gospel of love, if you want to stop and think about it. And hopefully we'll talk about some things here, but when you think about love, what do you think about when you think of love? And I'm talking about the kind of love here, the agape love. What kind of qualities, what kind of attributes do you think of when you think of the word love? Serve, okay. Okay. Yep. Okay. Okay. And we will get into 1 Corinthians 13 and talk about some of those attributes that they have listed there. But yes. Yes, sir. Okay. Okay. Great. That's a good point. Yep.
I think something that demonstrates love is on TV, you have an advertisement for Shriners Food,
Okay.
Shriners Hospital, and kids would say, what is love? They were given just a description of it. One kid held his leg up and kind of, cut off from his knee down, and he had a new leg. He said, love is my leg. Another one said, love is something else.
Okay.
They got
Okay. Good point. Okay. God. Yep. Okay. Okay. Good point. God is love. When I go to that point, I think of undeserving. Sometimes we have to love for undeserving. Anything else? Well, love's not easy, no? You like to think it's easy, but it's not.
You hear so much. Oh, I thought love. You have to work at loving people too.
Right. Why is that? Huh? Well, it's because we're all, I have to love her for living with me. Um, we're not easy to live with, are we? And, pardon me? Yeah, that's right, we have to love our enemies too.
So I think especially again, at the beginning of this chapter, there's qualifications being put on the gospel by people. Love is unqualified. It's ready to be accepted.
Okay, love, you have to be ready to accept, okay. Well, let's think about also love. I put some things down here. In Luke chapter 15, we have a story of what we call the prodigal son. And again, we can look at different attributes of that story. But with regards to that story, where can you find love in that story? In forgiveness. Okay, that's where I'm glad you're going the direction I wanted you to go. But yes, in forgiveness, who forgave who? The Father forgave the Son. What did that Son do? Wasted it. I mean, again, I'm not going to get into detail. You know, I've heard people say that when he went to his father and basically demanded his inheritance, it was, Dad, I can't wait for you to die. Just give me my inheritance now. I mean, as a parent, can you imagine your kid coming and, I really can't wait for you to die. Can you give me my inheritance? He went off to a far land. Dad let him do it too, by the way. He gave him he gave him what he requested. Went off to a far land, he wasted it, and then he came back. And how would you feel? That's a what? Yeah, he wound up in a pretty bad spot, but yeah.
Even more so than his forgiveness, which comes at the end, right?
Right.
I think we can see his love throughout for his son.
Okay.
My favorite part
Okay.
of that whole story is in verse 20. It says, he really came to his father, but while he was still a long ways off, his father saw him and felt compassion. His dad was looking for him the whole time.
Okay.
Right? That means daily he's out there, looking at the horizon, looking for him.
Mhm.
No, he loved him the whole time, even when
He wanted him.
tragedy.
Right. He wanted him to come back. Yeah. 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 Yeah, you think about that. I mean, what could his father have said? Man, I gave you all your money. Or what'd you do coming back here? I mean, go back. You made your bed, live in it. But he forgave him. He put a robe on him. He put his ring on him. He said, let's kill the fatted calf. My son's returned. He was lost. And again, God does the same thing with us. He forgives us. He forgives us when we take what he's given us and we squander it. Or we go do something we shouldn't do. And then we come back and we say, God, please forgive me. Does he say, Richard, I think this is the 37th time that you've asked me for forgiveness for. And yet, he says, I forgive you. So, yep.
It showed great patience.
Okay,
The father never gave up.
right, never gave up.
Instead, he kept,
Yep.
he kept looking, watching,
Yep. Yep. So we're going to ask that tough question now. When people do us wrong, do we, I'll forgive you first time, second time, third time, you burned your bridge with me. Yes, sir? Right. You're right. Good point. So think about that. Think about forgiving. Think about maybe something you've got going on in your life. Is it really worth not walking in the Spirit to have that loving heart? Is it? Or will it lead to what can love if we do that non-forgiving, what can that lead us to? Well, that's true, but it might turn you into doing something that will cause a strife or a jealousy or a fit of anger. Where are these coming from? They just came back. We just talked about these the past 6 weeks. You can turn that mindset into you where you now are part of walking in the flesh. So that's what this is trying to do, is don't do these. And this is what you need to concentrate on. There's no one, I should say that, but there's no one in this world that is worth you missing heaven over. Am I right saying that? I mean, you think about that. And there's a lot of people that are going to let something or someone miss their opportunity to go to heaven. So, in that way, I guess we do have to be a little bit selfish because we are looking out for each other, but we're not allowing these things to enter in our lives. We're not allowing that thing, that unforgivingness, to affect us and affect the way we live. Yes, sir.
Something I like about your scripture was 15. You can't find the word God in that chapter.
Right, right,
However, all of us can see about it.
right.
And so, while love or agape is a mindset, it's more so a demonstration. And so it's what you do that allows us to see what love is. And that is impacted because of what we've done.
Okay, good point. Well, also, love is sacrificial. How is love sacrificial, or where can we see that in the scriptures? Hold up that sign, guys, at the football game. What does it say? John what? John 3:16. God so loved the world that he what? Gave his only begotten son. Was that sacrificial? You got that right. 1 John 3:16. You ever forget John? You remember John 3:16? It's easy to go to John 1:3:16, which talks about him laying down his life for us, and because he did that, what? We should be willing to lay down our lives for each other. That's tough. Talking some tough stuff here now, guys. Talking some tough stuff here. We've already brought up before, Luke 6:35. We're supposed to love our who? Enemies. Is that hard to do? An enemy. What's an enemy? That's somebody that, it might not be somebody that's going to break in your house but these are people that just don't like you. I don't know why, they just don't like you. And they do mean things to you. Is that hard to love somebody like that?
You can love their soul, but you don't like what they
Oh, that's right, that's right, that's right.
I like how Romans 5 is quite a bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
God demonstrated his love while we were still sinners, Christ died.
Okay, great point. And how did he do that? He died for us. When he died on that cross, who did he die for? He died for us. What about that thief that was sitting next to him or hanging next to him? What about that soldier that was pounding nails into his hands? What about those people that were walking by and they were hurling abuse to him? Yeah. And what did he say as he hung there on the cross? Forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's some tough love. Well, you're right. He knew what was doing ahead, but I will say, I don't want to downplay that, but yes, he knew what was going ahead. But that's still, he was a man, and he was still having those emotions, those things that were built up in him that we run into today. And but that is something we need to look at when people are saying things about us or our enemies or however you want to look at it. We need to look ahead too. because we don't want to get back into those works of the flesh that we talked about earlier. Amen. Amen. Well, I know 1 Corinthians 13 was talked about. So let's go to 1 Corinthians 13. It says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels and have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers, I understand all mysteries, all knowledge. And if I have all faith to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, I deliver my body up to be burned, but I have not love, I gain nothing. So basically, without love, I don't care what you got in this world, I don't care who you are, you're nothing. What is love? Love is patience and kind. We'll talk about some of those. Love does not envy or boast. It's not arrogant. It's not rude. It does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. All those things that were just talked about there, I heard somebody say, take the word love out and put God in there. God is patient. God is kind. God does not envy or boast. He's not arrogant. He's not rude. He's not insist on having things his own way. He's not irritable, resentful, and does not rejoice. But there's things, I should say that there, I know God does have his things his own way because God is God. But I'm just talking about the way God is. But these are all things that we need to incorporate in our lives, to be able to walk in the Spirit, like he's talking about here in the Galatian letter. Comments? Yes, sir.
I think his grace is really love.
Well, okay. You're right. It's undeserving. You're right. Hey, yes. Okay. Good.
One of my favorite concepts in there, I think it's lost in translation, is the idea of love bearing all things.
Mm-hmm.
The phrase bear in Greek would tell us it's the same word they use to cover up like a roof.
Okay. Okay.
So the idea of love being something that covers the other and protects me. The cool idea that I think maybe we get lost in translation sometimes is, love puts love there. That idea of love being something that is going to protect and cover the other, and that's what I'm going to do.
Okay. Great point. Great point. Okay. Yes, sir. You got it? Yes. Yes. Yep. 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 And I think that's something we need to focus on every day. And again, just think of, I know there's that song that we sing that, what is the name of that song? But I hear my mocking voice from out the crowd. We think that we would be the ones that would have stood beside Jesus, but we see he was abandoned by all. So yes, it's a great point, and I think every Lord's Day as we remember his death, that's something to think about. But it's something we need to think about every day in our lives. Something that also was brought up was love is serving. John 13 and verse 35 says, a new commandment I give you, that ye love one another just as I loved you, and you are also to love one another. And by this, people will know that you're my disciples, that you love one another. So what's that telling us? That the way we love one another, people should be able to tell us apart. I think that's one of the great things about our congregation here. We're a very loving congregation. We care about each other. We can do better always, but that love that we have is that love that I care about you. I want good things for you. I want to help you out. I want to be there for you. John 14, verse 15 says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Again, talking about serving, talking about walking the walk, or talking the talk and walking the walk. How do we say we love God and then turn around and participate in the works of the flesh that we talked about over the past 6 weeks? Can you do that? Oh. Well, it ruins your credibility too. We try a lot. Yeah. Yeah, I did it. Well, I'm afraid that we want to, I shouldn't say it. We want to get as close to that line as possible without going over that line. We are called out of this world, but we don't want to be that weird person or that we still want to be part of that. Close enough, and the problem is we get pulled into it very easily. So, but yes, this feeling of love is something that we need to incorporate in our lives. We need to, a true Christian is going to do this. If you remember that last conversation, one of the last conversations Jesus had with Peter was he asked him, do you love me? Do you love me? And that first two was the agape love. And finally, when third one was a different kind of love that got kind of Peter's attention was, do you love me? But if you love me, feed my sheep. And that's something that we all need to do. I'm just going to reiterate this, and I'll probably reiterate it on every aspect that we talk about on the fruit of the Spirit is, take this with you. Think about your life. This is me pointing at myself too. But what can we do to incorporate this in our lives? What can we do to make us bear more fruit when it comes to this fruit of love, which again, we talked about before, I think is going to encompass and be the main point of all these things that we're going to talk about. Is there any other comments or questions or anything anyone wants to say before we end? I appreciate your putting up with my voice, and I appreciate your comments, and we'll look forward to next week as we start with another one. Thank you.